Okay, hello everyone. How you doing? Coming at you today. It's April 7th. Gonna give you three lectures on Ibsen's great play from 1879, A Doll's House. I got some emails yesterday. I'm sorry this is unclear. The play, you can watch it on Canopy. There's a link. Guess which folder? Course documents on Blackboard under vid links. There's a link there. Also, under course documents on Blackboard is this wonderful, wonderful play as a PDF, portable digital file of the text. It's right there. You can also Google it. It's in the public domain because it's over 100 years old. And it'll show up in all kinds of formats. Okay, so you can read it, you can watch it, and you can familiarize it yourself with it through these lectures as well. Okay, that's the idea. Is I am the supplement for your engagement on your own. You in the text, you in the film. Okay, so please, please, please watch the movie version with Jane Fonda, the wonderful Jane Fonda, and read the text. It's about 45 pages. You could read it in under 3 hours. It's a play, so how long should it take to read it? Okay, it's about as long as you'd have to sit there and watch it for. All right, in this case, take a break between each act. There's 3 acts. So I'm going to give you 3 lectures today in 3 parts. Coming at you right now with the first act, which we already had discussed to some extent yesterday. Okay, so Doll's House is known, and Ibsen is known for some key things. Oh my God, this is hard to erase. The whiteboards at school are definitely better than the ones you can buy on Amazon for $60. But I digress. 3 things, or 3 acts. Let's talk about 2 basic themes. One is what we'll call the play's realism, that is about everyday people, everyday people's lives, okay? Not kings and queens, not superheroes, not fanciful stuff, talking birds and dogs and cats. Regular folks leading their lives. Nora's a housewife, her husband's a lawyer who's finally found a job as a bank executive. Their best friend Otto is a medical doctor. These are regular folks. They're not historical personages. Okay, her friend Christine, who comes, is a widow who's looking for work. All right, so realism and the art of realism is, how do you take regular folks, their boring concerns that are not remarkable, how do you take them, these unremarkable people and their lives, and make them remarkable, make them extraordinary? How do you do that? And the answer for Ibsen is to be honest, be truthful, show the daily worries that they have, the little dramas that we all have, and by putting them on the stage, you bring people in because they're like, that's me, that's my affairs, that's what I'm like, that's what I'm going through, and so on. Okay, so there's an art to realism, there's a difficulty, but there's also a wide open door that people like Ibsen were able to walk through, because everyday people's lives are the stuff of drama. They are fascinating. Okay, so the realism of the play and also the feminism of it. And I want to direct you to an early conversation in the text, meaning the equality of men and women. Or I probably said that backwards. Women and men. But forgive me. Okay, feminism is not about female superiority. It's about It's not female chauvinism. What good would that be? It's about equality, women's rights, women's equality. Okay, women's rights are human rights. As someone I don't care for very much, Hillary Clinton once said, and I agree with her on that. All right, so, uh, and I want to point you to a part in Act One, conversation between two women, the two women in the play, the two, the two great women characters, Nora and Christine. Okay, and sorry, Nora and Christine, and look, what goes on with them is something that seems commonplace, but it's actually extraordinary when you think about the representation of women, and it's very modern. Their conversation is modern, even by our standards. It's incredibly forward thinking. Okay? Why? Because when they talk to each other, they don't just discuss how they feel about a man. Okay? There's a famous, in feminist studies of cinema and film, there's a famous thing we call, named after this lesbian cartoonist, Alison Bechdel. She's famous for uh, um, uh, she's famous for um, she's famous for a memoir that's now an award-winning Broadway show called Fun Home, about growing up gay, and she's a cartoonist, and uh, she has, in one of her cartoons, this very funny exchange where one of the characters asks another one, "Have you seen this movie lately?" And the one says to the other, "No, I only see movies where there's at least two women in the film, and they talk to each other and they discuss a subject besides a man." Who they're interested in. And you would be amazed, you guys, if you look, you can look this up online. Amazed how many great movies are considered the greatest masterworks in all of our culture and so on. How many movies, TV shows, books, etc. do not pass that test, do not have at least two characters that are women who both interact with each other, that don't just exclusively interact with other men, and that when they discuss something besides how they feel about men. Okay, so what happens early in in Act One, and again we're discussing the really, when we talk about the realism and the feminism of the play, we're really discussing its modernity. Okay, this is a deeply modern play. This is a modern play in these ways, and so just want to point this out to you. There's hardly anything to say about it, but I'm on page. Just want to point out just some illustration of this on page 5 overall of the text, about halfway down the page. Nora says to Mrs. Lynn, she says to Mrs. Lynn, this is her friend Christine, who's come to town, to the little town Christiana, but Christine's from an even more remote part of Norway, where Nora grew up, and she went back there when they were. This is shown in the beginning of the film that I'm having you watch, because the film adds this whole backstory that I don't find necessary, but is retold, is sort of alluded to in all this conversation here. Christine went back there as a young woman to aid her, like any common person would, to aid her aging mother and to look after her two younger brothers. Okay, she married a guy she didn't really love, but the guy had money, and that could help her secure her family. Okay, so she made this compromise, and here they are. We're passing the Bechdel test. They discuss something that's not just a man, although it starts that way, because Nora's husband is omnipresent. He's everywhere and all things and everything to her, in a way that's problematic, even that's difficult for her to overcome. So here we are. Nora says, "Now, we must begin. I won't be egotistical today. Today, I'll think only of you. Oh, but I must tell you one thing. Perhaps you've heard of our great stroke of fortune. No, what is it? Only think, my husband has been made the manager of the joint stock bank. Your husband? Oh, how fortunate. Yes, isn't it? A lawyer's position is so uncertain, again, always alluding to the financial unsteadiness, uneasiness of regular folks, even when they are seemingly quote unquote successful, an educated man, a lawyer, and so on. There's this quiet desperation across all classes of society outside of the ultra high bourgeois, the high managers of capital, the billionaires, and so forth. Um, oh, you can imagine how glad we are. He has entered a new position at the new year, and then he'll have a large salary and percentages. In fact, we shall be able to take. We shall be able to live quite differently, just as we please. In fact, oh Christina, um, I feel so lighthearted and happy. It's delightful to have lots of money and no need to worry about things, isn't it? Yes, at any rate, it must be delightful to have what you need. Isn't that a thing? Isn't that just so real? Not, it's wonderful just to have what you need. Again, the realism of that. It's wonderful. It's not something, Name me a show on network television that actually shows characters in this discussing this sort of reality of their lives, that they need jobs, that they've been struggling to find them, and so on. And look at what Christine, and this is where the Bechdel test starts to get passed. Yes, at any rate, it must be delightful to have what you need. No, not only what you need, but heaps of money, heaps. Nora, haven't you learned yet? In our school days, you were quite a shocking little spendthrift. Yes, that's what Torvald still says I am still. But Nora is not so silly as you think. Oh, I haven't had the chance to be of much of a spendthrift. We have both had to work. You too, Miss Lynn says, not quite believing Nora. Yes, light, fancy work, crochet and embroidery and things of that sort, and other work too. Of course, that Torvald left the government service when we were married. He had a little chance of promotion, and of course he required to make more money. But in the first year after our marriage, he overworked himself terribly. He had to undertake all sorts of extra little work, and to slave early and late. He couldn't stand it and fell dangerously ill. Then the doctors declared we must go south. You spent a whole year there, yes. And she begins basically to discuss money and figures and the reality that her husband overworked himself. And what's the point I'm driving at here? You're seeing that how do you pass the Bechdel test? Through realism. And realism means ultimately awareness of economic problems. That people need money, people need jobs, and to advance, you have to work. And that when work becomes so central to advancement, it can actually hurt people. He becomes sick from overwork. Now, I want to point out one other fact about the modernity of all this early part of the play. The shitty board that doesn't erase. And that's, again, the modernity of this early act. You can see this, I won't read it, but towards the end of the act, all the main characters are introduced. Rank comes in the room, the kind of friend of the Torvalds, of Nora and Helmer. Rank comes in the room, and he says, I'm here to visit, and it's introduced into Christina's mind that, hey, maybe this guy is into Nora, and this is where she got the money from. And then Krogstad comes to plead for his job, and then when he's done pleading to Helmer, he pleads to Nora. And Nora says, what can I do? And he says, well, if I go down if I'm fired, you're coming with me. And then she starts at the end of the act to allude to his coming and to suggest subtly to her husband not to fire him. She's not outright demanding it yet, but she's suggesting don't fire him. And and he comes back at her saying, no, a guy like that, can't have him around, bad for everyone. And he even goes further. He says his children, because of that's who their father is, and the fact that he committed financial fraud, that he forged documents, that's going to reflect on them, not because of the influence, but because of, Torvald describes criminality. He has a theory. Criminality by heredity, meaning you are likely to commit crimes because not of your upbringing and how you were enculturated and educated, that you had bad influence, but because of something deeper that you can't even control, who your family is in their genetics. And this is this old, very harmful idea of biological determinism, that we ultimately don't have free will, that what our genes say is what we are, that we can't correct through education, through effort, through will and effort and all this sort of stuff. We can't correct our faults that are there genetically. And it's in Torvald's mouth. So again, it's a criticism. And again, it speaks to the modernity, okay? That he's doubting this. He's doubting this theory. It's very harmful. And this theory, you're probably not even aware of how prevalent this remains. But if you've taken criminal justice, you probably learned these old theories. Hopefully they were criticized. I sometimes have my doubts about what's being taught there. But of criminal physiognomy, for example, that you could tell a criminal by how they look. They look a certain way. If they're ugly, for example, that they're predisposed to crime and this sort of thing. And that was genetic, and there was nothing you could do about it. So you just had to lock them up. But even more prevalently, the idea of an IQ test. That again, this is bullshit. This is an excuse to. IQ is supposed to measure your inherent, your natural, not your culture, your natural intelligence, your native intelligence that's passed down through generations, okay? And Torvald is speaking as though all this is factual, and the implication is, oh, since Nora forged stuff, and she takes it to heart, she shouldn't, that her children are doomed too, that there's something in her genes, and this becomes a big thing in Act 3, the final, that she decides to leave and all this sort of stuff has to do with the fact that he indicts her for criminality, and he mentions her father. Oh, it comes from your father, not from your culture, not from what he taught you, but from something inborn that can't be changed. Okay, very deeply conservative, deeply harmful thing for making an effort as a society on behalf of people who don't already begin life with a ton of advantages, with money and power and fame and illustrious families and so on, okay? Because what IQ essentially measures, ultimately, is what social class you belong to, what you are economically. That's all it measures. It's nothing to do with who you are naturally. It has everything to do with how rich or poor your family is. Richer families, more culture, more opportunities, more tutoring, more help. You can do better on your IQ test. Okay, so play is deeply modern, and it highlights this feminism, this realism, and then there's this criticism by putting it in the mouth of the villain, essentially her husband, putting it in his mouth, this theory of biological determinism that's been so harmful and has caused so much suffering in our society, because it's told us, hey, if someone gets a low IQ test, screw them. There's nothing you can do for them. They're just like that inherently. No amount of education and culture can change them. Okay, back at you about Acts 2 and 3.